We're now 6 months into the year of 2026, which means the end of yet another anime season. So it's time to start the spring season send-off. Once again, we had quite a number of shows this season, so with this long list before us, let's cover a few of my personal standouts. Starting with the first of a trio of Season 4s, we have Re:Zero Season 4 is back at it again, with more action and more gore, and new reasons to wallow in despair. Now, Re:Zero is big enough that you've likely already heard of it, but if for some reason you haven't, or only know the name, a spoiler-free description would call Re:Zero a mystery series with gore whose core focus revolves around time travel. And while there's plenty of lighthearted banter and comedy, things can get dark very quickly. However, if you can withstand the dark valleys, that makes the payoffs at the bright peaks that much more satisfying. Though for Season 4, while we get an odd number of episodes at 19, the 11 episodes we have now shows us how deep the valley goes, while we have to wait until August for the final 8 episodes to see how bright the peak will really be. But if you're interested in Re:Zero and haven't seen it, you have over 60 episodes and 3 seasons to watch before you get to Season 4, which if you started now, you probably have it finished by the time August comes around. Though if I were to make an observation, it feels like there are more people becoming outwardly vocal on how much they dislike Re:Zero. And this thing isn't happening for a series like Made in Abyss, which I would say has similar content to Re:Zero, if not even going further. So either people really hate the message of accountability and self-improvement, or Re:Zero is popular enough that creating discourse draws in the crowd, which brings in both attention and money. But if Re:Zero was really that bad, then how did the 4th season become the 2nd highest rated anime of all time on Mal? Not that the ratings of a website should influence your opinion, but the silent majority seems quite strong here. And I think moving forward, Re:Zero is going to do just fine. Coming up next, we have another Season 4. Once again taking place in high school, we get another view of teenage competitiveness and drama. But this time it's a bit more ruthless and bloodier than I remember, meaning it's again time for Classroom of the Elite. If you haven't heard of this series before, here's a bit of a recap. And it starts with our protagonist, Ayano Koji. With his average grades, average looks, and bland personality, he seems like someone who wouldn't make a single wave at the prestigious Tokyo Metropolitan Advanced Nurturing School, an elite institution established directly by the Japanese government. And while the graduates of said school are highly functional and go on to prospering careers, the training methods they use are quite isolated from the outside world, with many tests and challenges that if failed lead to outright expulsion. And with a class point system that on the surface encourages competition, in actuality, it leads to plots, schemes, and downright thuggery between the classes, each adding to their own survival at the expense of the others. Now, the first 3 seasons is the first year of high school. During this time, Ayano Koji focused on information gathering, counter-scheming, and overall trying to stay out of the spotlight. And while it didn't turn out exactly as planned, Ayano Koji made it through the first year, with Season 4 now starting the second year. So the previous 3rd year classes graduated, the then 2nd years are now 3rd years, Ayano Koji is now a 2nd year, and we now have a new group of 1st years. In addition, the school announced that there's not going to be just inter-class tests, but inter-year ones too. So not only are we competing with the 3 other classes of our year, we now have 8 more classes of the other 2 years to contend with. And to top it all off, someone set a bounty with the 1st years to expel Ayano Koji specifically before the end of the 1st term. And while there are a lot more characters involved and many more plot points to be uncovered, that information is better learned through your own watch of the series, or maybe an anime palette or explain series perhaps. But with the 5th season on the way, this story will continue in the future. Coming in with our 3rd 4th season, and while there are more 4ths in this season I won't be covering anymore today, we have Ascendance of a Bookworm. A technical isekai of a female librarian passing away and reincarnating into the body of a little girl named Mine. And while she's in a new world, she shares the same interest of the old one, of wanting to read any book that she can find. But being born to a peasant family, they can't afford the expensive tomes of the nobles. So she decides to make books of her own. So over the course of these 4 seasons, We see Mine attempting to create and preserve her own literature using technology from across the ages, reaching the point now where she's blueprinting her own printing press to rival the Gutenberg press. And that's putting aside acquiring funding, rival businesses, church-centered book monopolies, magic of the nobility related to a deadly peasant illness, and many other plots and tangents that comes with this medieval fantasy world. And these 4 seasons cover roughly 5 years of Mine's life from ages 5 to 10-ish. And now that the light novel has ended, story-wise it seems we're roughly halfway complete. So unless you have something against the cute aesthetic, this strange slice of a fantasy life might be worth seeing. Here we have what might be the most anticipated series of the spring season, Hat Atelier. And the reason behind this anticipation comes from 2 major points, the first being the beautiful animation, and the second being the magic system in play. And both of these aspects are showcased through the eyes of our protagonist, Coco, the daughter of a seamstress. And while she's always been enamored by magic, we learn through Coco that only witches have the capability to use magic, and that nobles and commoners alike will never be able to use magic for themselves. But to keep things relatively spoiler-free, Coco learns the secret to magic doesn't have to do with something like mana. Instead, it's just special ink drawn into special shapes, meaning that everyone has the ability to cast magic. Hence why the witches are trying to keep the process of them casting spells a secret. But there's a certain faction of witches called the Brim Caps that seem to want to expose witch society, which is how Coco became involved when one of these very same Brim Caps gave her an alleged magic grimoire and wand when she was younger. Which, after realizing the truth about magic, she realized that her wand was a secret pen and inkwell. And while playing around, she ends up casting a spell she wasn't supposed to, and gets discovered by the witch named Keyfree. Normally, when you find an accidental spellcaster, you would erase their memory. However, Keyfree seems to have his own vendetta against the Brim Caps, so instead of erasing Coco's memory, Keyfree invites her to become an apprentice at his atelier. That's the gist of the intro, excluding a few details that's more fun for you to learn on your own. Though what's interesting is that there's a show quite similar to this one called Little Witch Academia, which came out 9 years ago in 2017. And while the magic and hats are different, it's got a very similar pacing and general tone, which might help pass the time until we get Hat Atelier Season 2. Let's hope it's not too long of a wait. Smoking behind the supermarket with you. While the main story is effectively romance light, the main themes is very heavy slice of life. And the life we follow is that of our protagonist, Sasaki, your average white-collar salaryman who spends most of his days doing desk work, visiting clients, getting chewed out by his boss, and doing way too much overtime, with his only reprieve being when he can take a short break to smoke a cigarette. Though recently, Sasaki's been finding himself taking more trips to the local grocery store to catch a glimpse or even interact with a cute and refreshing cashier by the name of Yamada, giving him a second place of solace in his daily life. But after a stressful day of work, this latest visit goes differently, as Yamada is nowhere to be found. So instead, he goes for a smoke. But since the supermarket doesn't allow for smoking, he ends up going around the corner behind the supermarket, where a mysterious hand ushers him to come over, to which Sasaki sees a woman smoking by an ashtray, and she offers him to take a seat. As you can see, the concept is very simple, but in a way, that's what makes this series so comfy. Continued conversations covering very normal topics, such as complaining about work or talking about the weather, while teasing a little mystery that while the viewer obviously knows the answer, it makes you curious if Sasaki will ever solve it himself. But even if he doesn't solve it, witnessing each minute spent and every conversation had, we get to see these two personalities inch ever closer. But for this season, my personal standout was something that surprised me. If you would imagine for a moment that while growing up, you listened to the stories that your father would tell. In fact, he was a professional storyteller, practicing the art of Rakugo. You've spent hours watching him practice, knowing each story word for word and the tone of each syllable. Your father has continued to practice Rakugo for years, and he is finally eligible to take the exam to become a Shinichi, a Rakugo master. You gleefully watch and cheer him on as he excites the entire crowd of the building, leaving only the results to be displayed.
まあだらだら喋っても仕方ないんでね、結果を申し上げますと、今日の出場者全員破門です。
Our true story begins not with the father's performance, but instead the inspiration that he left behind, which was picked up primarily by his own daughter, Akane, who, after seeing her father's expulsion, decided to go to his very teacher and begin training to pick up her father's mantle of where he left off. And that's probably your best summary to the story of Akane-banashi. But we actually have another anime covering the topic of Rakugo. Back in 2026, we had Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju, which, while not directly related to Akane-banashi, it does show the trials and struggles that the present-day masters in Akane-banashi had likely gone through. But while that story covers Rakugo from the 1940s to the 2000s, this story shows Rakugo in the modern day. And what I enjoyed about this show in particular is how this show's structure is pretty close to a sports anime, in that our protagonist Akane is learning a skill to enter a world of competition, making both friends and rivals, making a nice sense of progression towards Akane's final goal of becoming a Rakugo master and winning the approval of the man who expelled her father. Though the most boring part of any sports anime is learning the fundamentals, which we actually skipped here because we saw from Akane's childhood that she's already spent years working on the basics, meaning that the lessons now is about turning a good performance into a great performance. Which means that while the process will still take time, it's quite clear that everyone can see Akane's potential. Combine that with how much love and care this anime goes into showing you Rakugo, from giving explanations of the story ahead of time, which gives hints to what makes a good performance of this story, showcasing the different tools and instruments involved in Rakugo, and giving light to the origins of Rakugo as an art. I can't help but want time to move faster, as we wait for the second season and can watch Akane's story continue. There are of course plenty of other anime that came out this season, but I think they'll be best binged another time. So with that said, I bring the spring season send-off to a close.